Sergeant David Porter's kinetic pistol blasted clean through the skull of the nearest Voxari soldier in a spray of indigo blood, as desperate human shouts and alien shrieks echoed across the hellscape that was once New York City. Earth's mightiest city lay in smouldering ruins, 5 years after the Voxari's merciless invasion began. Humanity clung to existence by a thread. The United Earth Defense Force fought on, but each week the relentless aliens pushed them back. Now, one of the UEDF's last comm towers stood on the brink, vital for any hope of coordinating a counterattack. Porter was one of 6 UEDF commandos holding the position against waves of Voxari troopers, their sleek black armor a stark contrast to the soldiers' battered fatigues. Plasma bolts and frag grenades ripped the battlefield as both sides spilled blood for control of the tower. Porter's rifle barked. An eye stalk exploded in a spray of sparks and fluid. But as Porter slammed another clip home, he glimpsed a sight that made his blood run cold. A lone Voxari female, pinned beneath a slab of concrete, with a trio of Voxari soldiers closing in. A civilian casualty, or something else? Porter had a split second to decide. "Cover me, damn it!" Porter roared into his comm, already vaulting the barricade. His squad shouted in alarm, but laid down suppressing fire as he sprinted across the killing zone. The Voxari barely had time to react before he was on them, monomolecular blades shimmering as it sliced limbs and parted necks in a whirlwind of close-quarters ferocity. In moments it was over. Porter heaved the rubble aside, scooping up the limp Voxari female as gouts of flame mushroomed from the tower's base. Klaxons howled in his helmet. The tower's reactor was hit. Secondary explosions chased his pounding footsteps as he ran. "Fall back! Fall back now!" Porter yelled, staggering into the evac shuttle with the unconscious alien in his arms. As the hatch slammed shut and acceleration crushed them into their seats, the hideous shriek of twisted metal marked the tower's collapse. One more piece of earth in Voxari claws. Porter clenched his fists, but with this mysterious alien captive, they had to strike back soon. Because if the Voxari broke humanity's coordination and communication, Earth would fall. This prisoner could hold the key to averting that fate, or seal it if her presence brought the enemy to their door. Medics swarmed around the female as the shuttle rocketed toward UEDF command. Porter collapsed against the hull, adrenaline ebbing. Against all protocol and sense, he'd saved this alien. Her life was in his hands now. He just prayed he hadn't doomed them all in the process. The evac shuttle touched down at the UEDF forward operating base with a hiss of hydraulics. Porter marched out, the unconscious Voxari female cradled in his arms. Ignoring the shocked stares and mutters of the base personnel, he strode towards the medical facility. "I need a doctor here now," Porter barked. A petite woman in a lab coat raced over, her almond eyes widening at the sight of the alien. "Dr. Emily Nguyen, xenobiology," she said. Who is this?" "Their Voxari prisoner. Found her in the rubble during our last op. She needs medical attention, Stat." Dr. Nguyen hesitated for only a moment before snapping into action. "Bring her to the exam room. I'll do what I can." Porter laid the Voxari on the table, watching as Nguyen and her team swarmed around, hooking up monitors and IVs. He caught the wary glances, the hands twitching towards sidearms. He couldn't blame them, but this alien was different. He could feel it. Days turned into weeks. The Voxari, Karos she was called, slowly healed under Nguyen's diligent care, and Porter found himself drawn to the medical wing, spending every spare minute at her bedside. At first, they could barely communicate, relying on halting gestures and a glitchy translation program. But bit by bit, a fragile understanding grew. "I am not a soldier," Karos said one day, her voice a melodic rasp through the translator. "I am an engineer from a labor caste. The Zocs, masters, they forced me to fight. Said it was my duty." Porter leaned forward, searching her onyx eyes that held no malice, only pain and confusion. "The Zoc, who are they? Why did they attack us?" "They rule all, control through fear, lies. Many castes, many factions, but also of the Zocs, all fear them. She looked away, slender fingers twisting the sheets. I do not know why they wanted your world. Resources, perhaps, slaves. All I know is I did not wish to fight, but to disobey the Zocs, it means death, or worse. Porter's mind raced. If Karos was telling the truth, then the Voxari were not a monolithic enemy, but a fractured species, with internal divisions they could potentially exploit. It was a glimmer of hope in the darkness. He reached out, gently taking her hand. Karos stiffened, then relaxed, meeting his gaze with a tentative smile. You saved my life, she whispered. Showed me kindness when you had every reason to let me die. I will not forget that, David Porter. Their moment was shattered by blaring alarms. Porter leaped to his feet as a voice crackled over the intercom. All combat personnel to the briefing room. Voxari offensive imminent. This is not a drill. Porter squeezed Karos's hand, a silent promise, then sprinted out, the thunder of booted feet echoing through the halls. In the briefing room, grim faces stared up at the flickering holomap of New York. Angry red dots swarmed across the display, Voxari troops pouring into the ruined city. Listen up, barked Colonel Greer, the base commander. The Vox are hitting us with everything they've got. We've got reports of a new leader on the field, some hotshot named Xerox. He's already punched through our outer defenses and is driving hard for Central Park. Greer jabbed a finger at the holomap, tracing a glowing line. Porter, you and your squad are our rapid response team. I need you to reinforce 3rd Platoon at this choke point. Hold that line at any cost. Buy us time to shore up our flanks. Porter snapped a salute, his face a mask of determination. Sir, yes, sir. He turned to his squad. The men and women he'd bled with, fought beside for years. Gear up and move out in 5. We've got alien bastards to send back to hell. As they double-timed it to the armory, Bulldog fell into step beside Porter, a cocky grin splitting his bearded face. Just like old times, eh, Sarge? Porter clapped his friend on the shoulder, trying to ignore the cold dread in his gut. In minutes they were in the thick of it, the staccato bark of gunfire and the sizzling hiss of plasma filling the air. Porter and his team fought like demons, holding the line against wave after wave of Voxari shock troops. Bulldog was a force of nature, his power armor shrugging off hits as he mowed down aliens with his HMG. But for every Voxari they killed, 3 more seemed to take its place. Porter could feel the tide turning, hope slipping away with each fallen comrade. And then the unthinkable happened. A crack split the air, sharp and final. Bulldog staggered, a neat hole appearing in his forehead. He crumpled, his armor clattering on the rubble. "Sniper!" someone screamed. "Get down!" But Porter barely heard them. He was already moving, a howl of rage tearing from his throat as he charged the Voxari lines, all thoughts of tactics forgotten. His rifle bucked and kicked, alien blood splattering his armor as he cut a swath of destruction through their ranks. He fought until his ammo ran dry, until his knife snapped off in a Voxari chest, until a plasma bolt took him in the thigh and sent him sprawling. The pain was distant, drowned out by the grief and fury boiling in his veins. A shadow fell across him. He looked up into the cruel eyes of a massive Voxari warrior, his armor adorned with the glittering sigils of a Zox commander, Xerox himself. The alien warlord leveled his pistol at Porter's face, mandibles clicking in a chittering laugh. Pathetic human. Did you really think you could stand against the might of the Zox Imperium? Porter spat blood, struggling to rise on his ruined leg. Fuck you, space roach, I'll see you in hell. Xerox chuckled, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Porter's comm crackled to life. Sarge! It was Nguyen, her voice shrill with panic. The base is under attack. Voxari infiltrators. They're inside the walls. They're heading for the medical wing. We can't hold them. Porter's blood turned to ice. Karos. He looked back at Xerox, at the armies swarming over the ruins of New York. The battle here was lost. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something he could save. He keyed his comm, his voice ragged but firm. Fall back. All units fall back to the fob. We need to protect the wounded. Ignoring Xarox's gloating laughter, Porter dragged himself to his feet and began to limp towards the distant base. Each step was agony, but he pushed on, driven by desperation and a flicker of fading hope. He had to reach her, had to save Karos. She was the key to everything, and he'd already lost too much to let the Voxari take her too. Behind him, the Zox forces surged forward, their victory cries echoing over the broken earth. But Porter's eyes were fixed ahead, on the smoke rising from the besieged base, on the battles still to come. Porter's heart raced as he sprinted through the chaos, the sounds of battle fading behind him. He had to get to Karos, had to make sure she was safe. The base's corridors were eerily quiet, the only sound his own pounding footsteps and ragged breathing. He burst into the medical wing, kinetic pistol drawn, and froze. Karos and Dr. Nguyen were backed against the wall, a makeshift barricade of overturned beds and equipment scattered before them. 4 Voxari infiltrators advanced on them, plasma rifles glowing with deadly intent. "Hey, uglies!" Porter shouted. "Pick on someone your own size!" He opened fire, his pistol spitting high-velocity slugs that punched through the nearest alien's armor like tissue paper. The Voxari spun, returning fire, and the room dissolved into a maelstrom of flashing plasma and ricocheting bullets. Porter dove behind a shattered console, popping up to snap off shots whenever he had a clear line. From the corner of his eye, he saw Karos grab a fallen Voxari's rifle, her face set with grim determination. They fought together, human and Voxari, their weapons chattering in deadly harmony. Porter felt a searing pain in his left shoulder as a plasma bolt grazed him, the smell of burnt flesh filling his nostrils. He gritted his teeth and kept firing, his vision blurring at the edges. One by one the infiltrators fell, until only one remained. It lunged at Porter, a wicked-looking blade glinting in its clawed hand. Porter tried to bring his pistol to bear, but his arm wouldn't respond, the muscles seared by the plasma. The alien loomed over him, mandibles spread in a triumphant snarl, but before it could strike, a plasma bolt took it in the side of the head, burning through its skull in a spray of molten metal and charred flesh. Porter looked up, his eyes widening. Karos stood over the dead Voxari, rifle smoking in her hands. She met his gaze, something fierce and proud blazing in her onyx eyes. "Karos," he croaked, "you saved my life." She knelt beside him, her clawed fingers surprisingly gentle as she examined his wound. "You saved mine first," she said softly. "It was the least I could do." Dr. Nguyen hurried over, medkit in hand, as the sound of booted feet filled the hallway outside. UEDF reinforcements, sweeping the base for any remaining threats. But Porter barely noticed them. His world had narrowed to the alien woman beside him, the weight of all they had endured, all they had sacrificed, heavy between them. "Karos," he whispered, reaching up to touch her face, I think I'm falling for you." She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I know," she murmured. "I feel it too, but how can this be? We're supposed to be enemies." Dr. Nguyen cleared her throat, her eyes bright with sudden understanding. "Maybe that's the key," she said softly. "Maybe the way to end this war isn't through more fighting, but through understanding, through love." Porter and Karos looked at her, confusion and hope warring in their expressions. "What are you saying, Doc?" Porter asked. Nguyen took a deep breath, her mind racing. "I have an idea. It's dangerous, maybe even crazy, but it might be our only chance." She looked at Karos, her gaze intense. "We send you back to the Voxari with Porter as your prisoner. You infiltrate the Zox command ship, gather intel on their plans, their weaknesses, find a way to end this from the inside." Karos recoiled, her eyes wide. "You want me to betray my people, to turn against the Zox?" "Your people are already betraying each other," Nguyen said gently. "The Zox are using you, all of you. This could be your chance to save them, to save us all." Porter struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "She's right," he said. "I don't like it, but it's our best shot. We have to try." Karos looked at him, her expression torn. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll do it for you, David, for us." Porter pulled her into an embrace, ignoring the agony in his wounded arm. He held her close, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "We're in this together," he murmured, "no matter what happens." They clung to each other as the base buzzed with activity around them, medics and soldiers rushing to secure the perimeter, to tend to the wounded. Dr. Nean watched them, a small smile playing at her lips. It was a desperate plan, a fool's hope, but it was all they had. And then the alarms began to blare, the base's speakers crackling to life with an urgent message. "Attention all UEDF personnel. Voxari forces have launched a full-scale assault on Geneva. All combat-ready units report to your stations immediately. This is not a drill." Porter and Karos broke apart, their eyes locking. "Geneva," Porter breathed. "Earth's last stronghold. If it falls—" "Then we have to make sure it doesn't," Karos said firmly. "We have to get to that command ship now." Porter nodded grimly, his jaw set. "Let's gear up and move out. We've got a war to win." Porter and Karos crept through the dimly lit corridors of the Zox command ship, their stolen Voxari armor allowing them to blend in seamlessly with the crew. Porter's heart pounded as they neared the central computer core, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. "We're almost there," Karos whispered, her clawed fingers dancing across a holographic keypad. The door hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with pulsing data nodes and flickering screens. Karos darted to the nearest console, her hands flying over the controls. "I'll need a few minutes to crack the encryption and download the data. Watch my back." Porter nodded, pulling a handful of explosive charges from his pack. He moved swiftly through the room, planting the devices on critical systems and power relays. The ship shuddered as the first charge detonated, alarms blaring to life. "How much longer?" Porter called over the din, his rifle trained on the entrance. "Almost done," Karos shouted back, her face bathed in the glow of the terminal. "Just a few more seconds." The doors burst open, revealing the towering form of Commander Xerox, flanked by 8 heavily armed Voxari guards. The alien warlord's eyes blazed with fury as he leveled his plasma blade at Porter. "You dare to infiltrate my ship, human filth," Xerox snarled, his mandibles quivering with rage. "I will flay the flesh from your bones." Porter stepped forward, squaring his shoulders. "Karos, keep working on that download. I'll handle this." He charged at Xerox, ducking under a vicious swipe of the plasma blade and slamming his fist into the Voxari's midsection. Xerox grunted, barely flinching at the blow, and backhanded Porter across the face, sending him sprawling. The guards surged forward, their weapons spitting searing bolts of energy. Porter rolled to his feet, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to weave through the barrage and close the distance. He lashed out with a flurry of punches and kicks, his strength augmented by the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Bones crunched and armor cracked as Porter fought like a man possessed, his mind focused solely on buying Karos the time she needed. But Xerox was a formidable opponent, his size and skill more than a match for Porter's raw power. The plasma blade hissed through the air, leaving sizzling gashes in the bulkheads as Porter dodged and parried. He felt the searing heat of the weapon as it skated across his chest plate, leaving a molten furrow in its wake. Karos looked up from the console, her eyes widening as she saw Porter's plight. She grabbed a fallen guard's rifle and leapt into the fray, her knowledge of Voxari anatomy guiding her shots. Together, they battled against the overwhelming odds, Porter's strength and Karos's precision working in deadly harmony. One by one, the guards fell, until only Xerox remained. The Voxari commander roared in defiance, his plasma blade a blur of motion as he pressed his attack. Porter parried frantically, feeling his strength beginning to wane. Xerox seized the opening, his blade slicing through Porter's armor and into the flesh beneath. Porter screamed as white-hot agony exploded across his chest, the wound cauterized even as it was inflicted. He staggered back, his vision swimming. Kairos let out a wordless cry of rage, leaping onto Xarox's back and sinking her claws into the gaps in his armor. The Voxari thrashed and bucked, trying to dislodge her, but Kairos held on with grim determination. Porter rallied, pushing through the pain and charged forward, driving his fist into Xarox's face with every ounce of strength he had left. The alien's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the deck, his plasma blade clattering from nerveless fingers. "Kairos!" Porter gasped, clutching at his chest. "The data!" "I have it," she replied, her voice tight with worry as she rushed to his side. "But we need to get out of here now." The ship shuddered again, secondary explosions rippling through its hull as Porter's charges continued to detonate. Alarms shrieked and lights flickered as they raced through the corridors, Porter leaning heavily on Kairos for support. They burst into the hangar bay, a maelstrom of chaos greeting them as Voxari crew scrambled to their stations. Kairos half-dragged, half-carried Porter to the nearest fighter, sealing the hatch behind them just as a plasma bolt sizzled past her head. Porter slumped in the co-pilot's seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps as Kairos powered up the engines. The hangar doors opened, revealing the inky void of space beyond. "Hang on, David," Kairos murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm getting us out of here." The fighter leapt forward, outpacing the command ship's guns as they screamed towards the blue-green marble of Earth below. Porter's vision began to darken around the edges, the pain and blood loss taking their toll. "Geneva," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "Have to warn them." The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the bright flare of a massive Voxari warship entering the atmosphere, its weapons already glowing with deadly intent. The fighter screamed through the atmosphere, its engines straining as Kairos pushed it to its limits. In the co-pilot's seat, Porter slumped against the restraints, his blood pooling on the deck. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak, but he clung to consciousness with the same iron will that had carried him through the war. The city of Geneva appeared on the horizon, a once gleaming metropolis now shrouded in smoke and flame. Voxari dropships swarmed like angry hornets, disgorging hordes of black-armored soldiers onto the rubble-strewn streets. Plasma fire and explosions lit the sky as the UEDF made its last desperate stand. But it was the looming shape of the Voxari warship that drew Kairos's gaze. The massive vessel hung in the air like a bloated spider, its weapons already glowing with deadly intent. She knew they had only moments before it unleashed its full fury on the city below. "The hangar bay," Kairos said, her voice tight with tension. "We have to get inside that ship." Porter nodded weakly, his hand fumbling for his sidearm. "I'm with you." Kairos keyed in the stolen security codes, her claws dancing across the console. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the fighter shuddered as a tractor beam locked on, guiding them into the cavernous maw of the warship's hangar. The deck was chaos, Voxari soldiers and technicians scrambling to battle stations as klaxons blared. Kairos set the fighter down hard, the landing struts crumpling under the impact. She kicked the canopy open, dragging Porter out with her. "The reactor core," she said, slinging his arm over her shoulder. "We have to overload it." Porter gritted his teeth, forcing his legs to move. "Lead the way." They fought their way through the corridors, Kairos's stolen plasma rifle spitting blue fire as Porter picked off targets with his pistol. Voxari soldiers fell before them, their armor scorched and smoldering. But for everyone they killed, 3 more took their place. Porter's vision blurred, his wounds screaming with every step, but he pushed on, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he had. For Earth, for humanity, for Kairos. They reached the reactor room, a cavernous chamber pulsing with sickly green light. Towering cylinders of glowing plasma surrounded a central control console, the air shimmering with heat. "The overload sequence," Kairos said, her fingers flying over the keys. "I can trigger it from here, but someone has to stay behind to make sure it goes off." Porter stepped forward, his eyes clear and steady. "I'll do it." Karos whirled, her expression stricken. "No, I won't leave you." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the blood and grime. "You have to. The UEDF needs that intel. Earth needs you." He smiled, a ghost of his old cockiness. "I'm just a grunt, expendable." Tears streamed down Karos's face, cutting tracks through the soot. "Not to me," she whispered, "never to me." Porter kissed her then, pouring all his love, all his hopes and dreams into that one moment. Then he pushed her away, his voice rough with emotion. "Go, live, fight for both of us." Karos nodded, her jaw tight with grief and determination. She turned and ran, not looking back, as the reactor began to hum with building energy. Porter watched her go, a smile on his lips. Then he turned to the console, his fingers poised over the final sequence. "Come on, you alien bastards," he murmured. "Let's dance." He hit the button, and the world went white. The warship shuddered, its hull buckling as explosions ripped through its innards. On the viewscreen, Porter saw the UEDF forces surge forward, renewed hope driving them on as the Voxari lines faltered and broke. "Give 'em hell, boys," he whispered. Then the flames took him and he knew no more. Karos stumbled from the escape pod, her ears ringing, her heart numb. Around her the battle raged, human and Voxari locked in a desperate struggle for survival. She spotted a familiar figure in the chaos, his uniform battered, but his eyes alight with fierce joy. "General Thompson," she called, staggering towards him. "I have intel from the command ship. Weaknesses in their defenses, the location of their homeworld." The general took the data chip, his face grim with determination. "Porter?" he asked quietly. Karos shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Thompson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "His sacrifice will not be forgotten," he vowed. "We'll make sure of that." Karos unslung her rifle, her grief hardening into icy resolve. "What are your orders, sir?" The general pointed to the heart of the fighting, where the Voxari forces were thickest. "We push them back," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "We make them pay for every inch of our world, for every life they've taken. We show them what it means to fight humanity." Karos nodded, her finger tightening on the trigger. "For Porter," she whispered. Then she charged into the fray, a battle cry on her lips, vengeance in her heart. The battle raged for hours, the streets running black with Voxari blood as the UEDF pressed the attack. Karos fought like a woman possessed, her rifle barking, her claws flashing. She could feel Porter's presence beside her, his strength flowing through her veins. In the end, it was almost anticlimactic. The Voxari lines crumbled, the surviving soldiers throwing down their weapons and fleeing to their dropships. Cheers erupted from the human ranks, ragged and weary, but alive, victorious. Karos stood amidst the carnage, her armor scorched and dented, her heart heavy with loss. But as she looked out over the shattered city, she saw something else, something that gave her hope. Humans and Voxari, working side by side to clear the rubble. Medics tending to the wounded, regardless of species. Soldiers clasping hands, united by their shared trauma and determination. It was a fragile thing, this newfound alliance, but it was a start. A chance for a better future bought with the blood of heroes like David Porter. Karos closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her mission settle on her shoulders. "I won't let you down, David," she murmured. "I swear it. Your death will mean something. Even if it takes my last breath, I'll make sure of it." She turned to face the gathered soldiers, human and Voxari alike. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. "The war isn't over. The Zocs are still out there, and they won't stop until they've ground us all beneath their heel. But today, we showed them that we won't go quietly, that we'll fight for our freedom, no matter the cost." She raised her fist, her eyes blazing with determination. "For Earth, for the Alliance, for every soul we've lost and every world we'll save, the fight goes on." The crowd roared, their voices mingling in a chorus of defiance and hope. And as the sun set over the ruins of Geneva, Karos knew that Porter's legacy would live on, that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The road ahead would be long and hard, filled with danger and uncertainty. But they would walk it together, human and Voxari, united by their grief and their resolve. For in the end it was the only way to honor the fallen, to make their deaths mean something, and to forge a new future, free from the tyranny of the Zocs. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.